Think about modern human institutions, schools, hospitals, economies. Often they function perfectly on paper. They meet their metrics, balance their budgets, and persist year after year. However, a deeper look reveals what they are actually maintaining. Stable, resilient systems can routinely conserve extraction, normalized suffering, and ecological destruction. Traditional engineering equates viability with functional persistence. If the line goes up, it's deemed successful. But evaluating life coherence requires moving past mechanical models. Grounded in Maturana's biology, it begins with the observer drawing a distinction to notice how a system is actually organized. The primary question shifts. We stop asking, is the system working, and begin asking, what manner of living is being conserved? Attributes like resilience and stability often act as camouflage. They can mask life-denying practices as long as a system continues to repeat its established patterns. Survival is distinct from viability. A system's ability to persist is irrelevant if that persistence destroys the biological and relational conditions that make life livable. The biological bedrock of this theory is that living is conservation through change. An organism exists in a dynamic relationship with its medium. It continues to live only if it conserves its internal organization while maintaining operational congruence with that medium. If this congruence is lost, the living system disintegrates. This dynamic is structural coupling. Organisms and media change together in a continuous history of interactions. This operates through non-instruction. The medium triggers structural changes in the organism, but the organism's own structure determines the nature of that change. Influence is reciprocal and nonlinear. Human environments follow this same biological logic. A child or a patient is intimately coupled to physical spaces, but also to relational and emotional atmospheres. They change congruently with the trust or fear present in their medium. Because organisms and environments are structurally coupled, we cannot diagnose failure by looking at an isolated individual. We must diagnose the coupled history between the person and the culture they inhabit. An organism exists as a totality in its medium. What an observer notices in that encounter is behavior. For humans, behavior is a relational flow arising from our history of coupling, not an output broadcast from inside the individual. Treating behavior as an isolated trait leads to domain confusion. It results in punishing interventions that ignore the relational flow actually generating the action. To understand what specifies behavior, we look at emotioning. Emotioning is a physiological phase space. It is the specific relational domain that dictates which behaviors are biologically and structurally possible for a living being in a given moment. In a domain of fear, the available vectors of action contract. The body is limited to freezing, hiding, or attacking. When the domain shifts to trust, the physical and cognitive actions available to that human being expand. Listening, exploration, and learning become possible. Interventions aimed at changing behavior will fail unless they first alter the underlying domain of emotioning that makes that behavior possible. Humans coordinate their lives and actions through languaging. We define this as the recursive, consensual coordination of doing, the process by which we align physical and operational behaviors over time. Languaging allows us to align our actions recursively. It is the biological mechanism through which humans create shared worlds of coordinated action.
When we braid this flow of coordination with the relational domains of emotioning, we get a conversation. Human existence takes place within this braided network of words, movements, and emotional states. Institutions function as massive, conserved networks of these braided conversations. Markets, courts, and hospitals exist as recurrent patterns of coordination and emotioning. If the underlying conversational emotioning remains unchanged, a new formal rule or metric will be absorbed by the old manner of living. A school can adopt well-being vocabulary, but if it conserves an emotioning of ranking and fear, the living reality of the school remains the same. Transformation requires the disruption and replacement of the braided conversation that the institution actually lives. When these closed networks of conversation are conserved across generations, they lock into a stable structure. This is culture, a systemically conserved manner of living. There is often a gap between what a culture declares and what it repeats. An organization can declare compassion in its mission, but if its daily interactions conserve hierarchy and objectification, its culture is hierarchy. A life-coherent culture must conserve the relational conditions that allow reflection and responsibility to thrive. This is the biological definition of love, the relational domain where the other arises as a legitimate other in coexistence. In this domain, two beings operate together without diminishing, displacing, or absorbing one another. Aggression is the opposite relational domain. It demands the denial of the other's legitimacy in order to function. A stable culture that relies on conserved aggression is structurally life-incoherent. It may present its normalized suffering as efficiency or order, but it systematically betrays the biological conditions of human living. If we want to see what a system is actually conserving, we require a set of diagnostic questions. These 8 primitives, derived from the requirements of living and coupling, act as probes to reveal the invisible conversational network of any organization. First, an observer maps the present structure, the current manner of living. Then we identify disturbances. These are the specific encounters that trigger change in the system without determining its direction. Next, we map regulation. What recurrent dynamics force a disturbed system back into its established pattern of conservation? This reveals what the system is truly committed to maintaining. Then we define the boundaries. Constraint identifies what limits a system's possibilities, which in turn reveals the margin, the actual room remaining for viable change. To diagnose a civilization, school, or clinic, we deploy these primitives to map the exact conversational network it enforces. The ultimate test of the grammar lies in the remaining nodes: relevance, possible doings, and at the center, love. Possible doings asks what actions this conserved network makes actually livable for the people within it. Does it open space for reflection, or does it narrow life down to compliance? This requires the recursive safeguard. The observer must apply the diagnostic grammar to their own diagnostic act. If this grammar is used to dominate or fix a system from the outside, it enacts aggression. The diagnosis itself becomes life-incoherent. The grammar is a reflective instrument, meant to help a living system see its own invisible conservation. When a system recognizes what it is repeating, it restores its own margin for choice. The grammar is successful only when the diagnosis ends, and a life-coherent manner of living is allowed to begin.